Okay. Why isn't this? All right. Baruch Hashem. Here we go. Why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? It's weird. Okay. That's why. Okay. Hello and welcome to the Parsha class. Parsha Mishpatim 5786. I'd like to dedicate this class in memory of Nechama Shena Bas David Chaim. Neshama should have an aliyah, and we should have many zchuyot and good memories um, as we go forward. With no further ado, let's get right into the Parsha. Parsha Mishpatim, which basically generally talks about tort law. You're probably wondering, where is there going to be anything about food here? But hopefully, if I am able to do this correctly, here we go. Hopefully, we'll see that there's quite a bit, um, hmm, quite a bit of food-related halacha, even in tort law. Parsha Mishpatim contains within it some lessons about staying healthy, the concept of bitul, avoiding meat that wasn't slaughtered, providing for the poor, not mixing dairy with meat, whether it's appropriate or not to eat in holy times, and more. So a lot of topics. I think we'll be entertaining Moshe Mordechai quite a bit today with all of this. So let's start from the very beginning, the first verse. Everybody likes the first verse, or at least the first aliyah. Chapter 21, verse 1 says, Ve'ela ha-mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem, which means, and these are the laws, Hashem is speaking to Moshe, these are the laws which you shall place before them. And Hashem in his Torah begins the list of laws following the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments is pretty much the last thing we saw in last week's Parsha. And right after the Ten Commandments, almost. I should keep saying almost because there is a little bit, there are a few verses after the Ten Commandments when it's talking about the building of the Mizbeach, etc. But uh, anyway, but right after that, we start with the laws of thievery and its repercussions. It seems a little bit strange, and a lot of the commentaries deal with this, including Rashi. Um, and one way to look at it is that this is because our taking what does not belong to us demonstrates a lack of faith in Hashem's providing us with exactly what we need. And that was the whole point of the Ten Commandments, was to demonstrate Hashem is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Hotzisicha Me'eretz Yisrael. Hashem cares for us and takes care of us and gives us what we need. So right after that, right after this introduction to the commandments, we have the introduction to the laws with a connecting vav that Rashi comments on. So there's something that connects them, and this might be it. One would imagine that such behavior, like stealing, would automatically discredit someone from a ritual position, but halacha actually allows a thief to become a kosher shochet. There's a halacha like that from the Torah in the very beginning of Yoredeah. The reason for this is because most people simply do not think deeply enough to connect the dots between stealing and lacking faith. This is according to Darash Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein, whose 40th yard site is coming up soon. And so it's, again, a cogent point from him. There is a story in which a shochet approaches Rav Yisrael Salanter. Sorry, one second. Why is this not working? Let's see if I can fix it. There we go. Approaches Rav Yisrael Salanter and tells him he wants to retire from ritual slaughter and go into secular business instead, which he presumes would be easier. Rav Yisrael Salanter responds that that if you are so worried about shechita, which involves one Torah prohibition, how much more should you be concerned about the business world, which has the potential for innumerable prohibitions? Like the business world can have, there's honesty in business, there's taking things that don't belong to you, there's upcharging, there's downcharging, there's trying to kick somebody out of an industry, there's competition, there's a lot of reasons that somebody might be unethical in business, and ethics, there's a lot of halachot of ethics. Again, starting with the ideas here in Parshat Mishpatim. So relevance here for the kosher world. Um, the next verse, the next verse we're going to look at anyway, it talks about a freed slave, and if the freed slave is im bagapo yavo bagapo yetze, if he comes in alone, he comes out alone. In other words, if he's single, he stays single, and if he's married, we'll see im baal ishahu, if he's a husband, yatsa ishto imo, his wife goes out with him. And interestingly enough, if you're buying a slave who has a wife, you have a responsibility to her as well. The halacha is if someone who buys a Jewish slave is responsible to provide food. Here's food again, relevant to us again. Oh, my camera is being weird. Okay, not important. Oh, you won't see me. That's okay. It's a good thing I wore a tie. All right, so uh, so the food is one of the things that a servant has to a slave owner needs to provide for the slave, and for his part, out of propriety, by the way, speaking of food, a slave should not eat in front of his master. That's there's a halacha like that too. Elsewhere in the Gemara in Menachos talks about that. By the way, just worth noting, I just noticed it's in the footnotes here, but Rashi says that this is the source of the idea that a slave owner needs to provide food for a slave's wife and children. But that's Rashi. Ramban disagrees. I'm sorry, give me just one moment. Okay. All right, Baruch Hashem. Sorry about that. I am back. For his part, out of propriety, yeah. So we talked about that. So next verse that we're going to look at is chapter 21, verse 10. It says, "Im acher ikach lo she'irak suta v'onata lo yigra." So if a person takes another wife, so her food, her clothing, and her conjugal rights, he shall not diminish. He has to provide his if he's going to have multiple wives, which again Ashkenazim and now Sephardim as well do not do ever since the Gezerah of Rabbeinu Gershon over 1,000 years ago. So but back when that was a thing, when people could have more than one wife, there was one of the responsibilities was to provide. You had to physically be able to provide for them, and food was one of the three things with which a husband is responsible to provide his wife. And this obligation is of rabbinic origin. Interestingly, the word she'era means meat, which is not the primary example of food, which is bread. So if so why so it's just an interesting thing that the Ramban points out that he has to provide her meat, but really it just means food in general. It's interesting that it's called meat. The Ibn Ezra has an interesting explanation. He says it refers to the wife's actual meat. In other words, he's feeding her flesh, right? He's making sure she's well fed, and that's the what meat is there. Somebody gets injured, chapter 21, verse 19. Im yakum v'hithalech bachutz. If he rises and is able to walk on his own, al mishanto, on his own walking staff, v'nika hamakeh, and then the person who hit him, v'nika hamakeh, rak shifto yitain v'rapo yirapeh. He should only pay for the loss of his time, and then that's all he has to pay for if the guy is able to walk again, and he has to be, of course, v'rapo yirapeh. He has to be completely healed. In other words, the person is responsible. Person who injures somebody is responsible for medical payment. That sounds like a great advertisement for a lawyer or a doctor, but that is, or an insurance company. That is one of the responsibilities that somebody has when they injure somebody else. Yeah. All right. So as we see in this verse, Hashem gives permission for doctors to help assist people in becoming healthy. This is the source for the idea that doctors can do their job, that it's allowed to do. You know, there are religions in the world. Might sound crazy, but there are religions in the world that say, "Hey, listen, the person got ill. That must be God's will that the person is not feeling well. So therefore, you cannot fix it. Fixing it is fighting against God Himself. That's you're not allowed to do that." So there are religions like that, and they for religious reasons they stay away from medical treatment, etc. And we say no, fakir it the other way around. We say that indeed doctors are allowed to do their job. It's a mitzvah to do, in fact. Needless to say, health is an important aspect of our existence in this world, and we are responsible for staying healthy in our food and activities because upkeeping an optimum health regimen allows us to better serve Hashem as we are required to do, and this should be our intent when we engage in our physical behaviors. That's one of the first halachot of the Rambam in Hilchot Deot, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see for the source. Yeah, Hilchot Deot, chapter 3, halacha 2. He's talking about how all the physical things we do, eat, drink, sleep, run, walk, whatever we do, all of it should be with intent, with kavana, to serve Hashem. That's why we do these things. Our sages in the Gemara discourage a person from radically changing one's diet, even for Shabbos, even for Shabbat, so, as that is considered unhealthy. That's the Gemara in Bava Batra 145b. That's one of the sources for the custom that people have of eating something from Shabbat, eating it on Friday. It's because that way you're not readjusting your diet. You're not eating a new food on Shabbat. You've already eaten it. You ate it the day before. So that's kind of one of the ideas. All right. Let's keep going. Chapter 21, verse 28, and then we're going to skip an entire chapter. We're going to fast forward big time. But shor et ish o isha, if there's an ox that gores a man or woman, umate, and to the point vamate, and to the point where that person died, sakol yisakel hashor, that ox needs to be stoned to death. It is killed. It is pelted, whatever. It's thrown off a cliff. Lo yachel et besaro, and here's we've got food. Its meat shall not be eaten. Uval hashor naki, and then the owner of the shore obviously is not responsible. He didn't kill these people on purpose. His ox did. He can't have known unless he did. That's a different story. But if he didn't know, this we're all assuming here that the ox did this in an unusual way, or. Well, we weren't expecting this. So an animal that kills a person may not be eaten. This is true even if it was slaughtered correctly. It doesn't matter what you do. You can't make it kosher, in fact. In fact, we may not derive any benefit from the animal at all once it is killed, including benefiting from its skin. That's Rav Samson Rafal Hirsch, quoting from the Gemara in Bava Kama 41a and b. We may not eat the animal. Why? Because we spiritually elevate the food we eat. That's why we eat. We just said that. There's a spiritual power to what we do, and this animal does not deserve this after killing a person. It's as simple as that, says the Khatam Sofer. That's why we don't eat the animal after it has killed a person. Right, so we skip, like I said, a whole chapter 22, verse 21, and a very short verse, 5 words, very important verse though. It says, Al almana v'yatom lo ta'anun, for a widow and an orphan may not be hurt. You're not allowed to hurt or in any way disrespect a widow or an orphan. What does this have to do with food? So, especially in times when widows were often employed as cooks, there are numerous stories of how our great rabbis were careful to avoid hurting widows. The Chavetz Chaim and another rabbi were once eating at an inn together. When they finished eating, the owner of the inn asked about their meal, and the Chavetz Chaim was very complimentary. One second. This is why we do this. We can fix a few things here and there. Right? The Chavetz Chaim was very complimentary. The other rabbi agreed, but added that the soup could use a little more salt. When the owner left the table, the Chavetz Chaim turned to the other rabbi and said, "What have you done?" The other rabbi responded, "All I said was that the soup needed a little salt." "Don't you understand?" said the Chavetz Chaim. "There's a poor Jewish widow that is the cook. Right now, the owner will scream at the cook for not satisfying these important guests, being us, right? The widow may lose her job. And if you don't believe me, let's go to the kitchen and see." And just as he predicted, indeed, they entered the kitchen and saw the owner yelling at the cook. Only after the intervention and continued compliments of the rabbis did the hostess calm down and let the cook keep her job. So again, that's how careful we have to be about not hurting a widow. Similarly, Rav Yisrael Salanter was once invited to a Shabbos meal by a wealthy man in his community. Second. Yeah. And but he usually refused. The guy kept like pestering him enough, so he eventually 1 second, what am I doing here? What's happening here? What did that happen? Escape. Oh, weird. Huh. All right. I'm learning new new things about my computer today. All right. So after pestering him enough, he explained his high levels of kashrut that he's going to adhere to, that he always adheres to, the great honor of Shabbat that his family displays with many songs, Torah thoughts, and much more. Finally, Rav Yisrael Salanter finally agreed only on one condition. The condition was that the meal would not last more than 2 hours. Indeed, the meal went very fast, with course after course being served quickly. Shabbat Zmirot were shortened or sped up, and Torah discussions were kept to a minimum. After Birkat HaMazon, the host asked for an explanation to the speed Rav Salanter desired. In response, Rav Salanter asked for the cook to be brought out of the kitchen. When she came before him, he apologized to her for insisting on such a fast meal. "Apologize? I'm so grateful that you did this. Now I can go home and rest." Rav Salanter turned to the host and said, "Now I hope you see why I did this. You run a beautiful Shabbat table, but it cannot be at the expense of this widow." So even there, you have to, even you're doing a mitzvah, you're doing a beautiful Shabbat, very nice, but you're again, it's on somebody else's cheshbon and somebody else's account that somebody else has to get hurt because of your frumkeit. That's not a good idea, especially a widow. It's worth noting. I don't have it here written down. I don't remember exactly who said it. I'm pretty sure it's the Ramban. But the whole widow and orphan significance isn't just about them. They're just an example of people who are mistreated often. It doesn't mean you can mistreat others. You have to treat everybody with the same amount of dignity and respect. And it's just that these people were often mistreated, and that needed to be changed. That needed to be fixed, which is why the Torah has it. Okay, let's keep going. And we're about to get to some very meaty subjects indeed. Um, it says, chapter 22, verse 28. Malachtecha v'dimacha lo ta'acher, b'chor banecha titen li. You shall not delay offering your fullness offering, nor your flowing offering, whatever that is. We're about to see. The firstborn of your sons shall you give to me. So what's this talking about? The fullness offering gets its name from the word maleh, full, because we hope for our granaries to be full of grains. The dimacha, the flow, refers to the products of the presses, oil and wine. The Mishnah, the Mishnah in Trumot 3:7, lists an order of precedence of the obligatory annual food donations. That's what these are. These are the donations that you're supposed to give of food. Now there's maser, truma, and these sorts of things. So, namely, the first fruits precede truma, since Hashem in His Torah calls these first fruits of all produce. Truma is taken before the first maser, and the first maser precedes the second. There's an order to how these have to be taken. The Mishnah there tells us what that order is. And again, this is food. This is food we may not eat. We need to donate it instead. Chapter 22, verse 30, 2 verses later. V'anshe kodesh tiyun li. Be holy people to me. Ubasar basada treifa lo tochelu. You should not eat meat in the field that has been torn. Right? Lakelev tishalkun oto. You should throw it to the dog. All right. So, first of all, it's worth mentioning that this verse is telling us that the reason for kosher is holiness. Tiyu anshe kodesh tiyun li. How? Like this. So staying away from non-kosher food is what makes us holy and defines us as Hashem's people. That's from Rashi. This holiness comes from the fact that one refrains from eating a torn animal, although it is not as repulsive as the animals mentioned later, nor is it a spiritual contaminant. So even though, I'm combining a lot of different perushim here together, but even though, in other words, these aren't disgusting animals, it's not the rat, it's not oysters, like we're going to hear about in Vayikra. We're still not eating this perfectly good animal otherwise. It just wasn't shechted right. It was torn to death by another animal. In other words, it was killed by another animal. It died, and so now we don't eat it. So it does not contaminate things spiritually. Not like not like a nevela and other trephos and other kinds of animals we're going to learn about. Not trephos. Other kinds of animals we're going to learn about that different shiratzim or whatever, a dead lizard in a bowl will make that bowl potentially contaminated spiritually. It becomes tameh. This does not make things tameh. And so you might think it's okay to eat it, but no, even here, being holy means refraining from it. Even if it has nothing to do with treifa. Now it's interesting. I don't really have much material on this. It's worth thinking about. This might be a chiddush. I don't know. It's worth thinking about why we often use the word for not kosher. We use the word treifa, whereas it's specifically this thing is a treifa in the Torah. So it could be. This is again. It could be because of this. It could be because of this very connection. Because the Torah itself really focuses on the fact that the reason for it is holiness. Kedusha is the reason for our dietary laws, not health, not wealth, not superstition, not magic, not Kabbalah. The reason for our dietary laws, point blank, is to become holy. How that works? Okay, then you might need Kabbalah. But figure out what holiness is and everything. Self-restraint, as we talked about early on when we started Sefer Bereshit. All right, there could be a lot of reasons why, but But restraining ourselves from eating non-kosher food is what makes us a holy people and Hashem's people, and maybe that's why the word treifa is used as the moniker, really, as the name of non-kosher food, because it's already connected. It's related to this idea of holiness and not holiness. The end of the verse tells us what to do with a treifa. Since you can't eat it, what should you do? We reward a dog with the treifa corpse. We give it to the dog, and so that says the Dat Zakanim that we give the dog the treifa because it was supposed to protect it. So here, dog, here. You were supposed to be the guard dog. You were supposed to be the shepherd, and look what you did. The goat got eaten anyway. Got ripped up by this wolf. This is on you. So this way the dog is rewarded to thank it, even for a job it failed to accomplish. So despite this failure, we should still nevertheless retain gratitude for the dog's efforts. So that's a lesson to learn for all of us. We should be grateful even when somebody doesn't fulfill the job that they were asked to do. Another reason to give our treifas to dogs is because they did not bark when we were leaving Egypt. That's a famous answer of Rashi. We can learn from this to fight our natural tendencies and desires, as we witnessed from dogs as we were becoming a nation. So right when we were becoming a nation, just as we were leaving Egypt, we looked around and here's all these dogs, and they're not doing what they're supposed to naturally do because God told them not to. So that teaches us to not do what we might naturally do. It's my nature to do this. I need to do this. I'm only myself if I do this. No, that's not how it works. You do what Hashem says, and that's how you fulfill your tafkid, your purpose in life. And last but not least, a little point here from Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Zechet Tzadok Levracha, says Hashem in His Torah uses the unusual word tashlichun with the letter nun at the end instead of tashlichu for shall be thrown regarding this treifa. One possible reason for this is that our sages encourage us to feed stray dogs in order to foster mercy and concern for Hashem's creatures. There's a Gemara like that. This is true in the fields where a stray would not become accustomed and dependent on the person going forward. This seemingly extra nun has a gematria of 50, which hints to the Talmud's definition of an area outside the city limits being 50 amos from the city, 50 amos. So there you have it. That's why there's an extra nun to remind you it's 50 amos. You're supposed to only be outside the city when you're giving dogs random food. But it was also worth mentioning, we said this earlier when we were in Parshat Bo, where the Jews leave Egypt, and we first mentioned the dogs there. We mentioned over there that giving the treifa to the dog is not a requirement, al pi halacha. You don't have to give it to the dog. It's just a suggestion. All right. Chapter 23, verse 2. We're going to get into some higher level, let's call it, higher level halachic concepts. And if this goes over your head, I apologize. I tried to sort of simplify things as much as I could. But these are concepts that poskim use and the halachic literature is filled with, so it's worth knowing. Chapter 23, verse 2 says, Lo tiyeh acharei rabim l'ra'ot. Don't follow the many to do evil. Lo taneh al riv. Do not bear witness in a cause. Lintos acharei rabim lihatot. To turn aside after a multitude to pervert justice. So in other words, do not follow after the majority to do wrong. If you know that if they're doing the wrong thing, you follow after the majority only to do the right thing. Acharei rabim lahatot. We follow after the majority. Now, what does that mean? It means majority rules in a court situation, but it also means other things. An important concept in kashrut is something called bitul barov, nullified in the majority, derived from this verse's last few words. There are different opinions about how this nullification actually works. Either the prohibited piece becomes permitted, and therefore one could eat them all at once, right? There's, say, three, right? I thought I had this case better. Right? So either the forbidden piece becomes permitted. This probably, huh? All right. Um, and then you can eat them all at once, or one can eat these pieces one piece at a time based on a presumption that the forbidden piece is in the remaining pieces. If there are three pieces of otherwise similar meat, two pieces of permitted meat and one forbidden. 1 second. I see what I have to do. There. If there are three pieces of otherwise similar meat, two pieces of permitted meat and one forbidden, the forbidden piece is nullified in the majority. Although according to the Torah, anything more than half is considered a majority, rabbinically, the majority is not 51%, but 2 in 1. Therefore, if the forbidden piece is bigger than either of the permitted pieces, even if the combined volume of the kosher pieces is slightly greater than the piece of non-kosher meat, the mixture is forbidden. So it's not 2 to 1 anymore. It's different. In practical situations, however, 1 second. There's a good place for it. In practical situations, however, uh, this leniency would only be allowed if A, it is a rabbinically forbidden dry food, B, if there would be a great loss, and C, if this is a pressing situation. So a lot of factors fall into it. And again, this is not a place for psak, but just these are general ideas that you should know that the poskim use to make decisions. And that's not the only one. There's also a similar concept. There's a halacha that states that when a piece of sliced meat of unknown origin is found among 10 butcher shops, 9 of which are kosher, on a Torah level, we can assume it is kosher thanks to a concept called kol de parush meruba parush, which means anything separated is likely separated from the majority, which is derived from the concept of accepting a law based on a majority in this verse. This concept applies only if the piece is not far from the other pieces. And then again, this is not the place to paskin. And also worth pointing out, it's almost irrelevant nowadays, right? Because you're not going to find like a solo piece of meat surrounded by butcher shops, right? There's gonna be labels and stickers and who knows what tape, all kinds of other stuff all over. So you're probably not going to get into this situation anytime soon. Baruch Hashem. Okay. Chapter 23, verse 11. Verse 11. Okay. But here we go. And this is about Shemitah, also food related. Vashvit tishmatena untashta va'achlu evione amecha v'yitram. On the seventh year, you should let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people shall eat. Tochal chayat hasadeh, and what they leave over, v'yitram, whatever they leave over, tochal chayat hasadeh, the animals of the field should eat. Kein taseh lecharmecha lezaytecha. So should you do with your vineyard and your olive fields. In other words, that's what Shemitah is. Also very food related and very relevant nowadays that we have, Baruch Hashem, Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. So we have produce there and here that comes from there. So they have to keep the laws of Shemitah. Shemitah did not fall away. Every 7 years, we keep Shemitah. By letting the land lay fallow for the Shemitah year, we allow the poor to eat. That's kind of the idea. It's kind of an economic balance worked into the system. The food of the poor is compared to an animal's food. Here we have animals and people and poor people eating the same food. I guess the Torah is saying they're equal, right? Wrong. The only comparison is because they do not have to give maaser in the seventh year. Not now, their animals nor poor people have to give the 10% of their income in the seventh year. They nevertheless have priority access to the food. Right? The people have access first, and when the people are done taking what they need, and if there's still food, that's when the animals can pop in and get more, according to the Sforno. Next verse we're going to look at, it says, chapter 23, verse 17, Shalosh pa'amim b'shana, for 3 times out of the year, the pilgrimage festivals, Yerecho zechurcha et penei el penei ha'adon Hashem. Right? 3 times in the year, all your males shall appear before Hashem, your master. And celebrating the holy days, the festivals, in a way to thank Hashem for our food, is a way to thank Hashem for our food and crop. And of course, that's this from Sforno. It's worth mentioning that's not the only reason for the holidays, but it's the first one mentioned. This is the first time we have the idea of the pilgrimage festivals. We'll have a lot more references to the pilgrimage festivals going forward in Sefer Vayikra and in Bamidbar, and when we get to Devarim. There are lots of times we're going to have references to these pilgrimage festivals. This is the only time that as the Torah talks about that these are festivals of harvest. These are festivals of taking in the food, of planting the food. It's all sort of food related. The reason for that, the reason why we have holidays then, is to thank Hashem for our food. It is an important thing to do. Part of the symbolism, part of the reason why food is such a restrictive thing on these holidays. On Sukkot, we're restricted where we eat. On Pesach, we're restricted with what we eat. And so that's where it becomes relevant. All right. So on that topic, right. The Torah concludes its discussion there of this with an interesting, seemingly side note. Chapter 23, verse 19, 2 verses later, Reshit Bekurei Admatcha, the very choice fruits of your land, Tavi, that you should bring, Beit Hashem Elokecha, to the house of Hashem your God. And then says, Lo Tavashel Gedi B'chalev Imo. You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Obviously, well, let's start with the first fruits. First of all, you should know that the first fruits are only from the 7 species that are grown in Eretz Yisrael. That's from Rashi. The Mishnah in the beginning of Bikurim makes that very clear. It's also worth mentioning, we're going to mention it many times again, but again, these are choice, right? The best. Reishit Bikurei Admatcha. You're supposed to bring the best of your first fruits. You again, we're sort of dedicating our best to Hashem is the idea, right? If we're gonna have good stuff, we're gonna share only the best with Hashem, not our garbage, which is again a possible reason for the murder of Hevel by Cain. Like Cain's offerings were not accepted. Hevel's were. All right, so it's a longer discussion, and we have more about that, Baruch Hashem, in Parshat Bereshit. Okay, now back to one of the pretty much fundamental concepts in Jewish kosher law, and that's the separation of meat and milk, which comes from this verse, amongst others. Hashem in his Torah mentions this prohibition thrice. Once to forbid the cooking of meat and milk together, once to prohibit benefiting from that combination, and the third time to prohibit eating that combination. So meat and milk are forbidden together, period. Now cooking meat and milk together is forbidden, as we just said. Hashem specifically mentions a goat. It's kind of interesting. A lot of people bring up, well, maybe it's only a goat that's forbidden. Maybe other animals aren't. So there's a lot of commentary on that. Hashem specifically mentions a goat either because this animal's meat is dry and might benefit culinarily from simmering in the milk, or because goats typically give birth to two kids at once. They would then have a large amount of milk, so it was customary among some people to slaughter one and cook it in its mother's milk. That's the Rashbam writes this. This behavior is both cruel and gluttonous, so this law is written specifically in the context of these festivals because this was a time when people would do this. Furthermore, Rabbeinu Bachai writes that the obvious cruelty inherent in the basic meaning of this verse implies that it is the characteristic Hashem wants us to avoid. He doesn't want us to be cruel, especially in the festival season. On the other hand, if the milk of the animal's mother is forbidden, all the more so is the milk of an animal which was never in contact with the animal. Right? In other words, if you might think, why is it its mother's milk that's forbidden? It's teaching you a kal v'chomer. All the more so, like if its own mother's milk, you can't cook it in, which is, it's right there. It's kind of like the same. They're related to each other. So how much more so another animal's milk should be even more forbidden? The underlying reason for other dietary prohibitions, and the rest is most of the rest of this is a large quote per se, paraphrase really, of Rav Samson or Frol Hirsch. The underlying reason for other dietary prohibitions might be the avoidance of undesirable, stimulating, or depressing effects of certain foods. So that's his take on most of our halachas of halachot of eating, that they have something to do with staying away from things that are unhealthy, either emotionally or ethically. One second. Why am I having trouble with this? Okay. However, this is ridiculous regarding meat and milk, because it is not only eating them that we are prohibited from doing. We're also not allowed to cook it or benefit from this mixture. Instead, like the law prohibiting forbidden species like crossbreeding, this prohibition speaks of the mixture. All things are supposed to have their own unique laws of existence and development, and we mustn't decide to put one thing back into something else. And that's what we're doing when we cook a kid in its mother's milk. Milk represents the nutritional, vegetative part of life that seeks to just carry on its species. That's why milk is made. Whereas meat represents the more animal part of life. Each one is supposed to remain separate. Similarly, the divine part of us should not be degraded into our physical existence. And again, I point out in a footnote here, Rav Samson Rafal Hirsch, much by the author summarized. And this is by far not the only reason for this law. Similar to the explanation that avoiding boiling meat and milk divorces us from idolatrous practices, since this law is in the category of a chok, no one logical reason is necessary nor satisfactory. The main halachot governed by this injunction are beyond the scope of this work, but many wonderful English language books have been written on the subject for scholars and laymen alike. I recommend Rav Daniel Channon's Keeping Kosher in the Kitchen, Rav Dov Birnbaum's and Rav Gavriel Brett's Hilchos Kashrus, An Inside Story, Rav Yaakov Moshe Golding's Yisodos Basar Bechalav, just to name a few. Lots of good stuff. Lots of beautiful ideas about how to keep these laws separating meat and milk. All right, chapter 23, verse 25. V'avaretem et Hashem Elokechem, and you shall serve Hashem your God. Uveirach et lachmecha, and He's going to bless your bread. Vet meimecha, and your water. V'hasiroti mechala b'kirbecha, and He will take your machlecha. He will take away your illness from your midst. Now, what you don't notice in the translation into English is that some of these words are actually plural and some of them are singular. And you, plural, shall serve Hashem your God, your being your God, plural, and He will bless you, or your bread. That's singular. Your water is singular, and He's going to take away your sickness. That's singular. So what's happening here? So your bread and your water will be blessed if you listen to Hashem. Bread represents all food, and water represents all beverages. Furthermore, this food that Hashem provides will be so nutritious that it will heal you of all illnesses. The bread at this point will be rich and fat. Says I think that's the Gemara says that. Yeah, no, it's a verse in Yeshayahu, chapter 30, verse 23. Serving Hashem is spoken of in the plural, but the reward is in the singular because we should serve Hashem united, but our reward is personalized, so that we should always be content with our lot without looking into someone else's plate. And that's from Rav Yaakov Galinsky. And again, interestingly enough, we're sort of back to what we started with in this parsha. The idea that Darash Moshe, that Moshe Feinstein pointed out, in that we have a responsibility to think of our physical things as coming from Hashem, and should be happy with what we have and not want to steal or in any other way affect other people's property. Chapter 24, verse 11. And this is, I think, the last verse that we're going to look at today. It says, "V'al atzile b'nei Yisrael lo shalach yado." This is Hashem sort of revealed Himself to the Jewish people, at which time the nobles, the great people of Israel, Hashem did not hurt. Why would He? V'yechazu et Elokim v'yochlu v'yishtu, and they beheld Hashem and they ate and they drank. Second, almost good. Yeah. The elders eat and drink while viewing Hashem and deserve death for it because they are unworthy to be on such familiar terms with their Creator. So this holy event is happening, says Rashi, and he says this elsewhere in Bamidbar 11:16. This huge, amazing revelation is happening, and here they are, just eating and drinking. It's sort of passé about the whole thing. So they kind of deserve death, but because it was such a happy event, Hashem did not want to mar things and kill them on the spot. On the other hand, the eating is the eating of sacrifices, which must be eaten within a structure as they are doing, which is what they're supposed to do. When you have to eat, you have to eat. When you're told to eat a sacrifice, if you don't eat it, it's a problem. And the drinking is a celebratory drinking that such an occasion would require. So according to the Ramban, they're doing the right thing, not the wrong thing. They should be celebrating. They're being, but so which is it? Could be both. In other words, Hashem didn't. Maybe there were different elders with different kavanas. If their intent was what it should be, and we talked about this earlier in this class as well. If their intent was what it should be, that they're eating for the sake of Hashem, so great. Other elders might have been eating because there's food, and that happens on occasion as well. But what's interesting is the Sforno says that they're being able to eat normally without losing their sanity. This huge event is happening: lightning, thunder, laser beams, everything is happening, and they're just minding their own business and being able to eat and digest. Really, their body is working like human beings. How is that possible? And the answer is, this shows that they had an elevated spiritual state. They were holding where the Ramban says they should have been. Again, to commemorate and to enjoy the food that Hashem had provided. Oh, I'm back. Look at that, just in time. Again, I wanted to dedicate this class in memory of Shana Wilkes, Nechama Shana Bat Chaim David Chaim. Neshama should have an aliyah. You should only hear Besora Tovot, good news, and Thank you for learning Torah with me. Hope you have a great rest of your week. If you have any questions or comments, you can you can ask them after I turn off the live feed, and then or you can just leave comments and questions on the Facebook or Rumble page, or
Okay.
Facebook or YouTube or all kinds of other places. All right, take care.
No problem. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you.